தினம்தோறும் விளக்கேற்ற நல்ல எண்ணெய், இதயம் நல்லெண்ணெய். இனிமே கண்ணை மூடிட்டு கடலை எண்ணெய் வாங்கலாம். ஏன்னா மந்த்ரா கடலை எண்ணெய் இதயத்தின் தயாரிப்பு.
சென்னை அண்ணா பல்கலைக்கழகத்தில் நேதாஜி சுபாஷ் சந்திர போஸின் 127வது பிறந்தநாள் விழா நடந்தது. விழாவில் கவர்னர் ரவி பேசியதாவது: தமிழகத்தில் நிறைய பேர் நாட்டின் சுதந்திரத்துக்காக உயிர் தியாகம் செய்தனர். தமிழகத்தைச் சேர்ந்த பலர் நேதாஜியின் இந்திய தேசிய படையில் இணைந்து சுதந்திரத்துக்காக பாடுபட்டனர். நேதாஜி இல்லாமல் இருந்திருந்தால் 1947 இந்தியாவுக்கு சுதந்திரம் கிடைத்திருக்காது. 1942 ஆண்டுக்கு பிறகு காந்தி தலைமையில் நடந்த சுதந்திர போராட்டத்துக்கு பெரிய ஆதரவு இல்லை. ஜின்னா தலைமையிலான முஸ்லிம் லீக் பிரிவினைக்காக போராடியது. நமக்குள்ளே பிளவு ஏற்பட்டது. பிரிட்டிஷ் ஆட்சிக்கு எதிர்ப்பில்லாமல் போனது. இன்னும் பல ஆண்டுகள் பிரிட்டிஷார் இருந்திருக்கலாம். ஆனால் நேதாஜி இந்திய தேசிய படையை உருவாக்கி பிரிட்டிஷாருக்கு எதிராக சண்டையிட்டார். சில இடங்களில் பிரிட்டிஷ் படையை விழுந்தது. பிரிட்டிஷ் படைகளில் இருந்த இந்திய வீரர்களின் நெஞ்சில் சுதந்திரத்தீயை மூட்டியது நேதாஜியின் இந்திய தேசிய படை. பிரிட்டிஷாருக்கு எதிராக இந்திய வீரர்கள் கிளர்ச்சியில் ஈடுபட்டனர். அதனால் பிரிட்டிஷாரின் மனதில் அச்சம் ஏற்பட்டது. இனி இந்தியாவில் இருப்பது பாதுகாப்பாக இருக்காது என நினைத்தே இந்தியாவை விட்டு வெளியேறும் முடிவை எடுத்தனர். இந்திய தேசிய காங்கிரசின் ஒத்துழையாமை இயக்கத்தால் நாங்கள் வெளியேறவில்லை. இந்திய வீரர்கள் செய்த கிளர்ச்சிக்கு அஞ்சுதான் வெளியேறினோம் என கிளமண்ட் அட்லியே பின்னாளில் ஒப்புக்கொண்டார் எனவும் கவர்னர் ரவி கூறினார்.
While we talk about Netaji, and because whatever little knowledge is there in the public domain, because much more to be researched, much more to be disseminated to the larger audience. But the fact is that Netaji has not been adequately projected, adequately understood. And it is not for Netaji, it is for the benefit of us, for the country. You know, when we study this, a great person like Netaji, while we talk about what he did or she did, in case of Netaji, of course, what he did. But what is important, more important is the consequences of those acts. As if it appears, it is presented as if Netaji, okay, he led the Azad Hind Fauj and he fought. After that, it was disbanded and Netaji disappeared. But does that end there? If you look at the consequences of what Netaji did, then you realize the contribution of this great man. You know, if I say that if Netaji were not there, India would not have become free in 1947. Because after this second war began and the non-cooperation movement by the Indian National Congress had fizzled out. If you look at the history of national freedom movement led by Mahatma Gandhi, after 1942, it was a non-event. Nothing was happened. We were all busy fighting ourselves. Because Muslim League under leadership of Muhammad Jinnah was fighting for separation, a separate homeland. So we were divided. British were enjoying it. There was no worthwhile resistance to the British rule in India. After 1942, in fact, after the war broke out. We kept saying that we will not cooperate. We kept asking the British to give us the promise that we will cooperate if you agree to make us independence, which they were not agreeable. But the fact is, on the ground, British had no problem. In India, they could have continued for many more years. But Netaji, when he offered a military resistance for when he stabilized the government in exile, Azad Hind Sarkar, backed by a military led by an able commander, and the military which fought the British on the ground, which defeated the British in several pockets of their strongholds. A visionary who had the vision to have alliances, military alliances with foreign powers. This military fight with the British by Indian soldiers, organized with a government in exile, recognized by a certain number of countries, equipped with military wares, that did not end with just disbanding of the Indian National Army. It ignited a fire within all the Indian soldiers within the British Army. And while we know that by September 1945, when it was disbanded, within a few months, within 6 months, Indians in British Navy revolted in February 1946. On 18th of February 1946, when the Indian Marines, Indian soldiers in the British Navy, they revolted and they took control of all the 20 warships of the British. The whole Indian Ocean, the whole Royal Navy was paralyzed. They were so scared. The British were so scared. And it did not end with that. While the in the British Navy, they revolted and seized the warships with all the war guns. Indian Air Force went on a strike. Where did they get this inspiration? Because most of the soldiers who fought the British, along with Netaji, they were also trained by the British. They were commanded by the British. But when it came to India's freedom, and when it came to the magical leadership of Netaji, the same Indian soldiers, those who had been listening, obeying the command of the British officers, they turned their gun against the British. The fact that an Indian soldier in the British Army can fight the British and should fight the British for the independence of this country, this fire came from Netaji. And it was the consequence of that the Indian Navy, I should say the Indians in British Navy and Indians in British Air Force, they revolted. And when they revolted, there were repercussions in other uniformed forces in India. It happened in February 1946. British realized that it was not safe for them to be in India. Because after all, they were in India. On what security? On security provided by the very Indian soldiers. And when they realized that they could not trust the Indian soldiers anymore, they were pointing the guns against the British. In hurriedly out of fear, in March 1946, they said, we are going to leave India for the first time. They said in March 1946, we will make India independent, British will quit India in next 15 months. They even set the timeline because they were so scared. A short interview, I won't call it interview, but a conversation. When Attlee, who was the Prime Minister of Britain during the time when India became independent, when he had visited Calcutta in 1950s, not as a Prime Minister but as a member of British Parliament, but since he was the then Prime Minister, he was treated as a state guest hosted in Raj Bhavan of Calcutta. Justice Mukherjee, who was the Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court, he was the acting governor. And over the breakfast, Chief Justice Mukherjee, who was the governor, asked Attlee that, look, I have a question, Mr. Attlee. What made you leave India so soon? Because after 1942, you had no resistance on the ground. You could have if you had chosen, you could have continued for some more time. What made you leave India so soon? And then he says, was it the non-cooperation of the Indian National Congress? And Attlee, with a smirk on his face, said, when he talked about impact of the non-cooperation, he said, minimal. That was not a factor. So what made you? He said, it was the fear of the British that they were not secure in India after the revolt of the Navy and rebellion of the Air Force. In fact, when I read this, which is recorded in this State of the Nation book by Nari Feldman, the great jurist,